welcome back to Triclaw Gaming with me, Fletcher, and welcome back to Isla Nublar. Today we're going to be talking about paddock decoration and how to improve the look of your exhibits, as well as thinking about some unique paddock designs that you could use. But before we get into that, please consider subscribing and liking the video if you haven't done that already, and make sure you've rung the bell to ensure you get updated about any of our future streams and videos. Now, to make better looking parks, designing your paddocks is a must. There are various elements to the process that I go through, which we'll go through together today. So let's start with something simple. Here we have some Huangosaurus, one of my favourite dinosaurs, and already with these four I've already made a simple design choice. Here we have two different skins being used to represent two males and two females. Using skins to create artificial sexual dimorphism is a good first step to creating better enclosures. There are a number of base game dinosaur skins that can fulfill this. Remember that male skins should be vibrant or decorative for display purposes, while female skins can be more simple. Here's a couple of other examples all using base game skins. 2001B Brachiosaurus skin for a female, and the 2001 standard skin for male.
Welcome a Brachiosaurus.
And the Savannah Ceratosaurus skin for females and the jungle skin for males. Consider the skins that you intend to use on your dinosaurs, especially if you are going to create specific biomes for them, and biome design is something we'll come to in another video. Now once you have your dinosaurs, we need to consider how your enclosures will look. Now before we get anywhere near creating an enclosure, let's consider all the tools and the parts that we have which we can be used for decoration and for enclosure creation. I've put down absolutely everything that I have here. This is all with the advantage of mods, but consider that in an unmodded game you still have plenty of these structures and decorative aspects as well. So let's start with the basic decorations. Trees and rocks. These are going to be your principal decorations, and in these we do have quite a lot of variation. Some of these rocks are quite jagged and acutely angled, while others are quite smoothed and low. These smoothed out rocks can work very well on the tops of sand dunes or in water to give the effect of erosion. Larger jagged rock formations work well placed anywhere or at the base of rocky terrain on the map to give the terrain more depth. These rocks can also make good little space filler, and again we'll be looking at that in a later video. With the trees, we again have a lot of variation. Again, one of these trees I have replaced through mods with a low fern, but in the base game, the date palm that this replaces is a good, useful beach, desert or swamp plant, along with the standard palm tree. The tall but bare trunk tree is good when making savanna exhibits, while both the larger, more leafy tree is good for more green, European style enclosures. The so-called tree of life here is useful in a range of enclosure types, while the redwoods can all be used together to create Lost World inspired forests. Plenty of mods have added new trees, bushes and log decorations as well, which add some much needed detail to your foliage and to your enclosures. Looking at signs and light pyramids, signs are a very small addition that can help with the realism of the park. Obviously you can place signs as your viewing structures or near enclosures to denote what's in there, but you can also use them as pretend education boards around your park. Something I like doing is having signposts along the route of a tour, or at the gates dividing sections, indicating what dinosaurs are in the next part of the tour ride. The use of light pyramids for me is a bit of a sticking point. I have seen some incredible illuminated art made with them, but I don't like using them too much for one key reason. They are very difficult to delete should you change your mind, especially if you have constructed your park already around them. Sometimes even just having a nearby path can stop you deleting the light. If you do intend to create artwork with them, or place down quite a lot of them at once, I would advise you make a save prior to putting any of them down, and save regularly after you have placed some down. So if anything goes wrong with your placements, you don't have to demolish half your park in order to remove a tiny little light pyramid. Moving on to pointless structures, you have the T-Rex paddock bathroom from the first Jurassic Park, and the raptor enclosure again from the first Jurassic Park. Now, I've seen the Rex bathroom used as a pretend nesting area for small dinosaurs, or as background decoration for a film-inspired T-Rex enclosure. But something I like to do is to use this as a pretend beachside changing room. If you're creating a beach-style enclosure for your dinosaurs, or have a beach with your hotels, you can put down a couple of these to create the illusion of changing rooms on the seafront. The raptor paddock can be used as background decoration for sure, but what about using it as a pretend enclosure for a small species of dinosaur? Surrounded by path, it can become a pretend exhibit. And all of these items are contained within mod packs. They come in a large range, from abandoned park details to little enclosure details such as egg nests. All these can add to the realism but also the decoration of your park and also the enclosures. Moving on to actual buildings, there are a few that I like to use if I create an abandoned park style enclosure. The weather reporting station and the bunkers are small enough to be usable inside enclosures. A little path and fencing helps to create the effect. Remember, of course, that you will get warnings that buildings are not connected to path. However, if you can put up with them, and if you go into the options and remove the notifications popping up on the map, you can deal with that. Now let's move away from the buildings to the terrain brushes and using them to make your enclosures look better. Firstly, the terrain brush. A good thing to do is to layer the brushes for new effects. For example, on a slight slope or a ridge, tapping the rock brush over the grass allows you to create a nice effect that highlights the slope. Tapping the sand over the shale, if you have a mod that allows it, creates a nice pebble or gravel effect, which can be used in rivers or at the edge of water sources. Tapping the rock over sand creates a nice sandstone-like effect, or, if using the traditional white sand, almost a snow effect. The bushes brush comes next. Now on their own they do look quite different. The grassland brush has these low ferns, the coastal comes with these nice purple flower bushes, the crag has these dull-looking dry bushes, and the vivid comes with these red bushes and tall flowers. Together, these can be used to create dense foliage, but I like to use specific bushes at specific areas. The flower bushes can be used as gap fill around your parks, especially in the guest area, thanks to all the flowers. Use the grassland brush around forests to blend them into the environment. I use the crag brush over the shale terrain to create eroded looking paths. A final thing to consider is how you use water in your enclosures. If you want to create realistic looking rivers or streams, make sure that you add slight curves, also called meanders, into the watercourse. Use terrain brushes to create artificial depth to the river and blend the edge to the rest of the enclosure. So using all these tools together, let's take a look at making a few enclosures, and let's start with something simple for our little Hoangosaurus from earlier. I've created a simple meadow style enclosure for the small stegosaurs. Making this enclosure is fairly easy, and you can use a similar method for other designs. Start by pre-constructing an area for your paddock. I find this style works best as a small enclosure surrounded by path. In order to create the appearance of a gentle slope, create a height difference inside the paddock. You can do this in a number of different ways, but I find the easiest is to create a high section at one end of the paddock and allow it to slope down to the other end. Smooth the terrain out to create a gentle slope, remembering to make sure you keep areas of flat terrain at both the top and the bottom for water and for feeding platforms. Now for the meadow, you want to have as few trees and rocks as possible. I find that a slight tap or two of trees at the feeder end of the paddock is usually enough, but you could always add a few singular trees if you want more control, or a small group of trees that often come in a variety of mod packs. The main vegetation you want to use here is a combination of coastal and vivid, which gives you plenty of flowering bushes. You can also mix it up by adding a few patches of grassland for the ferns, but I wouldn't do this too much. At the edge of the water, add some simple rock formations, and a bit of sand over shale adds a nice pebble stone effect for the water's edge. And that's really it. A very simple enclosure for the bright Hoangosaurus, and you can copy this sort of design into any size of enclosure for any dinosaur you might want to use. The larger you have the enclosure, the more designing that you can do. But what about something more substantial? Let's take our next dinosaur. Tyrannosaurus is by far one of the big name dinosaurs for your park, but let's give this big guy, or girl, something unique. And for this particular enclosure we're going to use Matanceros, but you could probably use this style of enclosure on any map. What we are going to build is a large sunken enclosure with a raised promenade, a semi-realistic paddock design that bears some resemblance to the sorts of enclosure you'll see for dangerous animals at modern day zoos. The first stage of this is to create a raised promenade along one edge. On here is where you'll have viewing towers, viewing galleries, and other guest buildings. Now if you use the Advanced Terrain Tools mod, you can have a straight flat-faced promenade, but in the base game you'll end up with quite a steep angle. You can create this style of enclosure easily with both mods and non-modded games. Now at the bottom of the slope, you want to create a ditch by lowering the terrain down even further, below the level of the pre-flattened enclosure and the bottom of the promenade slope. Now this ditch can be decorated in a range of different ways. You could place water in here, but what I like to do is have a sand-lined section with various large boulders and stones along its length, as a natural sort of defence. A fence running along the edge of this is also important in order to act as a realistic defence, but also something that you can connect the perimeter fence lining to. Line the slope itself up to the promenade with pathing, whichever type you like, in order to make it look like smooth concrete or brick, anything like that. You can at this point add a nameplate or something similar, just as a nice touch. Now for the enclosure itself, you have a large area to design here. You could use any biome design. So for our Rexes here, I've gone with making a Lost World inspired enclosure with plenty of redwoods along the back of the enclosure, with less at the front as we move into a sort of grassland and riverbank edge. Remember not to fill all of the empty space with bushes. Leave gaps for the low natural grass and use shale or dirt to add a further definition to these areas, making them look well travelled. Don't forget to use a few taps of the rock texture over the grasses to add further definition to rises and slopes, or to use sand and shale along the watercourse. An enclosure of this size is easily large enough for multiple T-Rex, even a T-Rex living alongside other species of carnivore or dinosaurs. Additional touches that you can use here is to use existing pointless buildings in Sandbox to create an abandoned area. These decoration mods also come with plenty of nice touches that you can use, including signs, tents and skeletons, all of which you can use to add a touch of interest to your enclosure. You can use this design on both modded and non-modded Matanceros as a focal exhibit at the back of the park. For example, here we have the same paddock, but designed as a desert-style enclosure for a mixture of herbivores. Key to the design of a desert-style enclosure is to make some soft dunes created with terrain tools. Also, add some rock over the sand in places to look like sun-baked terrain. Water sources should be surrounded with vegetation, but you can also add some vegetation to one side of the dunes, which in the event of rain they would naturally have more vegetation on one side than the other. Here is the same space, but reconstructed as rocky terrain, perfect for a volcanic valley, for example. Thus, using this space at the rear of Matanceros can be a good way of building your parks around environmental features, and can be a good way of adding some interest to your islands. Now, in Blue Peter fashion, let's take a look at some other designs which I made earlier. A simple abandoned paddock style for a Carnotaurus. A few buildings linked with path, a few fence sections, and some lighting help to create the effect, and it all fits within this very small area. How about a beachside exhibit for some herbivores, namely some Triceratops here, using a few structures and terrain to create this artificial beach. If you use considerable numbers of mods, you could create this walkthrough exhibit using existing fencing, invisible fencing, and multiple sections with multiple herbivores in each to give the illusion that you're walking through just the one paddock. You could even use the same sorts of invisible fencing to create a two-level enclosure where you have quite a big height difference that makes it look like you've got two combined paddocks in one. So we've got some carnivores on the top level and some herbivores on the bottom level here. These are just a few of many ideas, and a lot of them are doable without mods. I know that for console players the game is starting to get a bit stale at the moment, so I would suggest you take a look at the videos I've done, and even any other Jurassic World Evolution videos made by other YouTubers for inspiration. In the next video, we'll take on the question of biome design and how best to create interesting looking biomes in your park, as well as what particular dinosaurs best suit them and what skins suit these biomes the best. If you are new here and you've listened to the end of the video, I'd like to thank you, and please consider subscribing if you have not already. If you're not new here, please remember to like and comment on these videos. It really does help us, and we are still desperately trying to get to our 100 subscriber mark by the end of July. We are well on our way, but we would like to keep the growth going. As always, stay safe in the current situation, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.